Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to all the debaters and anyone who's ever had an opinion. Welcome to another episode of Campus Debates with me, Masivu Gutsa. It's been a lovely ride so far. We've had preliminary rounds, and at the same time, we've had quarterfinals, semifinals, and a race for third place. For this particular episode, we get teams to actively fight for position 5 and 6 on the tab of universities. It is a great privilege to actively be considered as top 6 universities among the scale for campus debates. You have seen how far it can get. You have seen how much people actively fight for positions within campus debates. So for this episode, it makes it that much better because the teams that you have are credible teams willing to fight for their lives for 5th place and 6th place. For this episode then, we have teams from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology as side proposition, and the team from Pioneer International University as side opposition. I think the faces are pretty familiar to you, so before they introduce themselves, I'll allow our beautiful panel to introduce themselves and let us know something they're expectant about this round.
Hello, and good evening. My name is Gloria Bon, and I'll be one of the panelists. And I'm just hoping that the best team will be number 5. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Twain. I'll be chairing this round. I am so excited to see the debate at hand, considering the motion.
Hi guys, Lucy Osenyi. Well, excuse us if the call will be too feminine. I mean.
So you have heard from the judges themselves. They're wishing the best team the most luck to possibly get position 5. But at the same time, they ensure that their call will be very feminine, but at the same time, very just. I'll allow the speakers to introduce themselves by mentioning their name and the probability for whether they think they can make position 5 or whether they've abdicated that for a position 6. Proposition?
Hi, my name is George Kerito Chege. I am from JKUAT, having studied public administration and leadership. As to whether we are going to achieve position 5, I will leave that up to our lovely and able judges. But I will say for myself, we're pretty confident in the case we have to offer, and probably this will resonate with some of the police officers out there for whom I have a few choice words.
Hi everyone, my name is Leon Agula. It is not lost to me that this is the battle of the losers of the losers. That being said, I am hoping that we can have an engaging debate and one that obviously starts conversations out there, especially given the present day situation and the current attitudes that we have towards police officers, and perhaps this is the beginning of a conversation to be had. Thank you.
From side proposition, their sentiments are, if you can't debate in finals, you'd rather change their minds and shape discussions and discourse. It's an amazing opportunity regardless from side proposition. We welcome opposition to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Ndolo. It's about taking an L with grace.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. For whatever I am about to say, tafadhali, msikuja kunisalimia kwa DM. It is just the side that I am on. But I am grateful to be back here on screen against these guys. Again, hopefully we shall change the game as from last time's results.
And from side opposition, they want to actively lose with grace, which means their goal is to be 5th in the rankings of the universities that have participated in Campus Debate Season 2. But just to highlight, it's not saying that the team that gets 6th is the last on tab. It's just saying that the team that gets 6th is the 6th best university among all the universities that have spoken for Campus Debate Season 2 that were actively 12 in total. I think it's a big win for them regardless. Without further ado, the motion for this round reads, this House would allow police officers to refuse orders on grounds of conscience. This House would allow police officers to reduce orders on grounds of conscience. I know police officers has been a term at the tip of our tongues of late, us wondering whether we need to have better policies for them to actively police us, or even to just man us within the streets and outside of them. Without further ado, we welcome the first speaker proposition to start off the debate for us. Here.
Zombie, oh zombie, zombie, oh zombie, zombie, oh zombie, zombie, oh zombie. My Nigerian friends, I hope you appreciate that one. So, I will start by giving a short story of a man named Dirango Mau. He was the guy who famously killed one of the biggest patriots of the country, Dedan Kimathi, in October 1st, 1956 at Karunaine Forest. He met this Dedan Kimathi at that forest and shot him. His defense, while going into court having justified what he'd done, is the British wanted me to kill him, and so I did. Now, of course, part of this story, please keep in mind, judges, is to argue on self-preservation, which is one of the things they're probably going to come in and argue on. Now, Dirango Mau was given a hefty reward at the time. That is 500 shillings, which in today's standards is 80,000 Kenya shillings. He bought himself a lorry with which he was hoping he would ferry passengers from Nyeri to Nairobi. And of course, you will think that this is a happy ever after for him because he has followed his orders, done what he needed to do. Now, of course, he needs to just sit back and reap the rewards. But unfortunately, in as much as you can argue, oh, following orders, keeping your job, self-preservation and all of that, you do not live at the behest of the government. You still live within a wider society. So what happened to Dirango Mau? His lorry was completely shunned by the residents of Nyeri, to an extent that nobody wanted to do business with him at all. He was given the name Muthimo wa Kimani, which means Kimani's tibia. But that basically the Achilles heel of Kimani. And him and his family were completely shunned. His children were made fun of while going to school. His wife was ostracized from larger society, of course, making conversations, going to the marketplace and buying groceries, blah, 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 things like that. Which I tell this story to tell you that by the time he died in 1986, he repeated over and over again, if I were told to commit those orders, I wouldn't do it. He died with regret. And he didn't die with regret purely out of conscience, which of course we are arguing for, but purely for the reason that conscience is not just an individual thing, it's a societal thing, because most people in society recognize that what he did was wrong, and even if he wasn't going to hold himself to that account, the rest of the people would. Which brings me to a few points that I want to make. Police officers do not live at the grace of government. They live within a wider society. Think about these kinds of situations. The working conditions of police officers in Kenya is the types of houses they live in are deplorable, right? Unless you're a senior police officer, an OCPD or an OCS, the average police officer does not benefit as much from the kind of rewards the government will give them as you will think. As compared to a civil servant, for example, they don't necessarily benefit. Think, for example, of the guy who blew up his own hands during the June 25th demonstrations. When he was trying to get his health payments processed, he had difficulty. Why? Because government is that inefficient at even providing basic health services for their police officers. Now, think about this. If a police officers were to decide enough is enough, the government has mistreated us, we're going to go on strike. Look at how other strikes are usually treated. When teachers go on strike, they can't get paid. When doctors go on strike, they can't get paid. But they do have societal backing. If they decide to go to the shopkeeper and tell them, I don't have any money, but I am a teacher, and I will ask you to give me things on credit so that I may be able to feed my family as this strike is continuing, more likely the shopkeeper will say, of course, let me help you out. Same for a doctor. But let me assure you, a police officer will get none of that grace. Why? Because they are actively participating in orders that the people themselves are opposed to. For example, brutalizing protesters on the streets when they say we are against and fed up with the current neocolonial system. So, there is that to consider, panel. The second thing to consider as well is the type of people, the type of orders that they're carrying out, how they affect them directly. So there have been stories, for example, of a police officer who was brutalizing people on the streets, only to go back home and find out that, yo, your brother was also killed by another police officer. Now, when that police officer went to the funeral, people were like, you're still a police officer, so you're indirectly a cause of this. So even the process of grief and mourning wasn't allowed to him. Why? Because the people who are around him are like, if you had the chance, you would have killed him as well. There is that. There's also the whole thing of Haiti and police officers being used by tools in the neocolonial system. But the basic idea here is, at the end of the day, conscience is not just an individual thing, it's a societal thing. And if police officers know that what they're doing is not right, then more likely they're better off betting on siding with society as opposed to the government, because power is transient. So if you're counting on the government to have your back and be like, you followed officers, now we're going to reward you like a good little zombie, I promise you that's not coming, and more likely going to be than rewarded. With that, I rest my case.
You have heard the argument from side proposition. They say police officers would rather back society compared to governments based on the transient nature of governments. We welcome side opposition to offer their argumentation and equal engagement to proposition. Hear, hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, the problem with George is that he spends half of his time singing, then the rest of the half telling us a story about Dedan Kimathi, etc. May the Lord rest his soul. We value Dedan Kimathi's contribution towards our society. We value the contribution of all the Kenyans that showed up in the protest, and we value our police officers as well for maintaining order to some degree, and we value the officers who also did not do their best to be still, because they are Kenyans as well. Everybody is a Kenyan. We are all fighting for our nation. However, I think it is important for us to have a bit of reason, yeah? And George loses that to a very large degree. I think largely, one, because of his personal feelings, and I think that is the first reason why we do not even want police officers to have conscience, and I will tell you why. But I think secondly as well is, by enacting whatever proposition we want, let us assume that they are right and conscience is good, we end up having a much more chaotic state than we would actually have, and we'll show you why that is a bad thing. If I'm not able to do that within my speech, Ndolo has an entire 6 minutes of glory. So, firstly, monopoly of violence. Ladies and gentlemen, let us understand that as per the law and as per our constitution, state has a monopoly of violence. What does this mean? This means at a point where there are certain activities that are happening that disturb the peace and the identity of the state, then the state itself has the mandate to protect itself and to protect the individuals within these situations by enacting certain acts of violence. That is why in some instances where there are criminals and there are riots on the streets that are destroying public property, the state has the mandate to actually come in and take these people from these situations. However, they need to ensure that the rest of the property that has not been destroyed is protected. Such are instances where we really need to understand that police aggression is necessary. However, what we do not agree to is police brutality. We don't think that is something that can be argued in this debate to a very large degree, and I think that is why George was trying to meander his way through it, and I'll tell you, I'll just call it as it is. Whoever is brutal as a police officer will be brutal regardless. So whatever George wants to argue, that we want to implement conscience so that police officers are not aggressive with individuals as following orders. Police officers are not given orders to be aggressive with individuals. They're given orders to protect the peace. It is these specific police officers that choose to be aggressive. That means even if you talk about giving these people the ability to use their conscience, they will still be aggressive because they think this is justified in their own situation. So you are not going to save yourself, George. They will still be brutal with you. I am sorry, there's nothing you can do about it. So now let's go into more substantive matter. Why do we think that this idea of implementing conscience is a very bad thing? Two things. One, we think there is already other alternatives that already exist that implement some sort of sense into these police orders, right? We think that there already exist court systems that are already working within the system to bring some sort of conscious bias inside of orders. That is why court systems are, the judicial system is able to actually tell these police officers that these orders that you've been given are unlawful and they reject these orders. Rather, that there already exists like some sort of checking mechanism for these orders that already exist. Why we think that it is very, very important for us to maintain the already existing system. Police officers exist within a code of conduct and uniformity. This uniformity is very, very important for them to be able to carry out their own mandate. Why? Because at a point where a state is completely diverse with different individuals from different backgrounds, from different ethnicities, etc. Whenever you introduce something like conscious which is as George was saying, determined by society, that means it will vary from place to place because societies are different and people are raised in different ways. What that means then is that we lose the uniformity of law. That means that a police officer who is from the trenches will actually allow a chicken thief to go free because he already understands why this person is stealing the chicken because he has no food to eat. So we'll allow this person to go scot-free. We think that's a very problematic panel because that then means that certain individuals are not going to be protected. Minorities in this society's panel are also going to be facing a lot of backlash. Why? Because if we go with the idea that conscience is then determined by society, that means police officers, a large majority of these police officers who are in a certain society are going to be made up of individuals who either resonate with the people there or to one degree relate with these individuals either through their race, either through their ethnicity, etc. That means then that the minorities in these spaces will not be protected because the conscience that is taken as law is only by the majority. What does that mean for minority communities in this country? There are 40-something tribes that we have in this country, but there are only 3 or 4 that are very vibrant. Does that then mean that the law of Kenya is going to be determined by 4 tribes? We don't think that makes sense. We don't think that is state mandated. We don't think that then is a state that we actually want to live in. Secondly, panel, we think then that these police officers themselves will not be protected. Why? We saw a certain police officer who decided to stand against the stance that government had taken. We saw this individual constantly being threatened by the government, his family being threatened. He was fired from his job, panel. What does this then mean if we allow each and every police officer who thinks that some order that has been given to them is unlawful? What does this mean for the police officers? If George is arguing that these people are underpaid, if George is arguing that these people are poor and they cannot afford a loaf of bread, do you then want these individuals to do things that will make them lose the job that gives them at least the ability to buy 2 mandazis or something of the sort? We don't think it's justified, panel. We argue protect the citizens, protect the police officers, allow the code of conduct to remain.
It has been a lovely first half of the debate where we've had proposition argue for the idea where consciousness is determined by society, and because of this, police officers need to be on the side of society for their preservation to exist. Then from side opposition, they argue preservation needs to exist, and the only way that can exist is if you actively uphold the code of conduct based off of the nature that consciousness is very subjective, as is society. With that, we'll be going on a short commercial break, and once we are back, we'll get to hear further argumentation from both proposition and opposition. See you in a few minutes. Welcome back to the second segment of this episode where teams are fighting for 5th place and 6th place. The motion for this round is this House would allow police officers to refuse orders on grounds of conscience. What proposition has argued is conscience is largely determined by society, and because of this, police officers need to be on the side of society more than they are on the side of the government that doesn't give them the value that they ought to be given. From side opposition, the argument is that the state has monopoly of violence, which means there's a code of conduct that needs to be followed and a certain form of uniformity that needs to exist. When now you base it on consciousness that's subjective, then this uniformity is directly altered. I don't know which argument has swayed the team that has been with us so far, but we allow the second speaker proposition to further their argument. Here.
I'll start off first of all by saying that the entire thing that necessitated this conversation in the first place is that we ended up witnessing, in the wake of the protests that have been happening, we ended up witnessing a lot of brutality that was being meted out on the people. As such, the people were in every right to ask the police officers, where is your conscience? Because these are there are people who are seeing their own brothers, their own sisters, their own children as part of the police force, meting out violence against them. And therefore the question came up, where is your conscience in all of this? Now, opposition tries to talk about the fact that a lot of these things, the reason why conscience doesn't need to be talked about is that the state will descend into chaos. There needs to be a code of conduct. We need to recognize the fact that the national conscience is already enshrined in the Constitution. This is what the people want. Yet the police officers are going transgressive to that. Because remember, if the police officers are being told to refuse orders on grounds of consciousness, they're not doing this in terms of orders that necessarily help the society, because there is no ground of conscience that can make you right in terms of protecting property. However, there is grounds to refuse to do something because you feel it is not right to kill someone, it is not right to maim someone, it is not right to be brutal against someone. Even the judiciary they talk about, in the wake of these protests that have just come, affirmed this because the judiciary always was on the side of the people, because they always kept on saying that the police officers should not be doing this. Therefore, the police officers, by the very actions that they were by the very actions that they were meting out against the people, already going against the conscience of the society in which they live in. Because remember, police officers are not people who live in isolation from us. They are amongst us. They are our fathers, they are our mothers, they are our brothers, they are our sisters. Therefore, if we live in a society where these police officers are going to be treated as pariahs, where exactly are we going for? Because if the entire thing is about self-preservation of these police officers in this society, even if they have all the money in the world but no one wants to engage with them, we don't necessarily see how this is a self-preservation that ends up helping them in the first place. Because remember, the example that George gives you about Ndirangu Mao, this is someone who was given an equivalent of 80,000 shillings. And then ended up living in the society where he was in. However, the entire society shunned him because no one wanted to be associated with him. It was basically the 60s version of kusalimiwa. So we now end up finding ourselves in a situation where now when they talk about the preservation of these police officers and how we need to ensure that their children can continue to eat, they can continue to get 2 mandazis, now the very security of the family members of these police officers is at stake. Because, for example, police officers are identified and then everyone says, oh, this police officer lives here, this is his wife, these are his children. Where is the self-preservation in that? That is all we are asking. Yes.
What is the role of the police officer in society?
Yes, I was getting to that. So the police officers are people who are given the power to exercise the law, and they're supposed to be in service of the people that they serve. However, if they're going out doing their duties because they're subservient to the political class that is above them, that is not necessarily serving the people, and they're not necessarily serving the constitution where the national conscience is enshrined, we don't see anywhere where these are people who are exercising things in terms of the benefit of the people. Because what we're talking about here is that when they are refusing orders on grounds of conscience, it is not only a matter of self-preservation for themselves or the people around them, it is also the fact that these are people who live in a society. We do not want to have a society where we all of a sudden ostracize a part of us simply because these are people who are continuing to kill us. And even as the first opposition speaker said, we are all people who are fighting for our nation. We all want our nation to be better. I wouldn't want for a situation where the family members of a police officer are all of a sudden ostracized, and all of a sudden we say we don't care about them because they are associated to a police officer. Because this is something that happens. Case in point, status quo. Every single day after the protest, everyone used to identify a police officer and say, this is where the police officer lives, this is the partner of the police officer, these are the children of the police officer. Therefore, if their biggest case is in terms of the preservation of the self, already the vested interest into this person are already endangered. Yes.
Is the order to be brutal against the people, or is the order to protect these individuals while they conduct their constitutional rights? So,
okay. The order here is that they're supposed to be in protection of the people. However, police officers usually are given orders that are going against the people. These are not, because, okay. When we talk about things such as extrajudicial killings, when you talk about people being maimed in the streets, all in the name of protecting property, is this really something that is in service of the people as they claim? Because their biggest claim here is that police officers ought not to use conscience because it is very subjective and therefore there needs to be a code of conduct in which people are protected. The very national conscience that is enshrined in the Constitution is being transgressed by the police officers. Because they're being given orders to go and kill people, they're being given orders to go and maim people when they don't necessarily agree with this. Therefore, it would be a lot better to actually protect them so that they will be able to refuse to do these actions, while at the same time be protected in the society and ensure that their loved ones are also protected within these societies. With that, we rest our case.
We have had propositions argument. They state that consciousness needs to be something that is used by police officers prior to the orders that they are currently given by whoever it is that gives these orders in the first place. We welcome the second speaker, opposition, to complete the argument and equally engage with proposition. Hear, hear.
We think it's quite unfortunate that conscience only starts after you've already agreed to terms. We think you already have a contract that exists within this place. We think, one, for a police officer, the first step that exists for you is you're most likely going to apply for this lot or going to whatever, just for you to get to that position. When you get to that position, you have terms that need to be met. This looks like you actively need to follow orders from above, or secondly, if you're not following orders from above, it means simply the police in itself is not an independent institution. You can't run away from that, and that's where the premise should have worked. If we needed a conscious police who are following what the premise of the institution is, you don't get that. But simple, it means you have a contractual obligation to follow orders from above. Even if the orders above are bad, we think it's still justified for you to follow these orders. If you don't buy into these orders, you have buyout mechanisms that would ensure you get to protect your conscience. This looks like saying, I would actively resign out of this position, or secondly, I'll just choose to put my letter and let my boss fire me, or do something stupid that will make my boss fire me. You already have buyout mechanisms if you need to protect your conscience to that point. But alternatively, we think the mandate you have is to serve the state. We think the state works with the idea that it has the biggest monopoly of violence. I'm not using this for the sake of violence, I'm using this in principle, and I'll prove it. We think the only time you have police officers who are being told to go out and offer protection or certain aspect is when there's a sense of anarchy or a sense of destruction that is going to occur. We can easily prove this with protest. There's loss of property, there's loss of life, there's just that idea that anarchy is going to occur. We think anarchy is bad on 3 levels. One, it harms the idea of the state and the identity of the state. If we lack that stability, you cannot offer any forms of protection. But secondly, it actively ensures that you have no forms of continuity for the state. You have no normalcy. You just can't wake up tomorrow and know, I will have this certain routine. You lack that routine. It's bad for you. You can't offer any forms of continuity for the state. But thirdly, it just generally ensures that there's a level of harm that is constantly going to be propagated in society, and we think it's bad. If you allow this level of anarchy, for a state it means 3 things. One, the state is not going to exist, and that's bad for the state, and that's why we think it's justified for them to follow order from above. But secondly, it just means the community, even these people who offer this conscience to society, are not going to work together. You have the idea that Raila is bad or this is bad. If you do not allow that form of lack of anarchy, you have so much forms of distraction that exist between these people. It means you lack social cohesion. We think that is bad in principle, and there's no justification for it. But thirdly, it just means majority of the people who exist within this space would choose to self-protect. We think this is bad for them because it just ensures that the benefits accrued to them work just for them, and that's bad in principle, and we are not supporting it. But secondly, Chair, we think the duty and mandate of the principal, and that's why the POI was important, is to ensure that you work to protect these people. We think when Nick has the mandate to ensure that she judges this round fairly, she needs to do that. If you choose not to do that, it means someone else needs to do your job. And if you actively choose to become the debater instead of the judge, it means you're doing someone else's job. We think you already have institutions such as the judiciary that constantly works to protect these people. It constantly stops orders towards the police or the military that are bad for society. We think this conscience already exist within the systems that work in society. If we decide to take away this mandate from such institutions and give it to police, it means one, you invalidate these systems that exist in these spaces, meaning the judiciary becomes null and void, and that's a bad thing for society. We think the level of protection it offers the majority of the people that exist within this space. This is why George would be beaten up and will still be set free by the court system. We think this general idea means there's already levels of protection that work for society. You don't need to give someone's mandate to someone else. We think that's bad for them. Yes, I'll take VOI.
Is your suggestion, therefore, that they should follow orders from above, even if it is transgressive to the constitution that exists?
The contractual obligation is a principle. You can't run away from it. If you have a contract, you need to supply 100 bags of maize and you supply 40, you're messing me up, and that's not justified. We think the idea is you constantly need to meet your end and receive whatever the other end needs to offer, and we think it's justified. But we think the backlash is way worse in their world. If they're offering and they're saying majority of the police people should choose to pursue their conscience, we think it's bad for them because one, majority of the leaders who are elected to this position who offer these orders are the representation of the conscience of the society. If majority of these people want Ruto, Ruto will become the president and Ruto will give these orders. It's a direct representation of what the society wants. If you choose not to follow the orders of what the society has offered, we think it's bad because it's actively going against the choices and the decisions that have been made by society, and we think it's unjustified. But the worst bit about it is if you choose not to listen to the orders from above, the only alternative is majority of you are not listening to it. So there's no protection for anyone that exists in society. We think the police offer the biggest level of protection. If you lack this protection, one, society just doesn't exist. You can do whatever you want. You can kill whoever you want. If the police are not there and the conscience is saying, okay, it's justified for Ndolo to kill Nika because Nika looks like Ndolo, we think there's just general idea in society is bad because it ensures there's no check mechanism, there's no logic, there's no institutions that work to propagate a certain sense of orders and directions that work for them. We think it's bad for them, and there's no justification. Responses to them and why you think it's bad. Simple. Even when there are scenarios of extrajudicial killings, the orders from above are to ensure protection, not to go kill people. We think generally people who go kill people will kill either way. Even if they are not within the police system, they will kill. We think it's the general existence that shapes them to be that individual rather than do what is right. We think if the order is say, protect properties, please, policemen, protect properties. You killing Dolo is not protecting property, but beating George, who does not want to protect property, is a bad thing. Either way, we rest.
We have had the debaters give us an amazing and exhilarating debate amongst themselves, defending whether police officers need to make decisions based off of their consciousness or just to follow the orders that they're currently given. We will be going on a short commercial break, and once we are back, our amazing judges will have a verdict in place for us to determine who is 5th place and who is 6th place. See you after a few minutes. Bye-bye. Welcome to the final segment of this episode where we have the teams fighting for the position of 5th place and 6th place. It's been an exhilarating debate so far where the teams are trying to defend as to whether effectiveness would exist within the Department of Police officers through making decisions based off of consciousness or just following the orders that are given by whoever is giving these orders in the first place. I think it's been engaging and it's been fun, but the judges differ with that opinion. According to them, they need one more chance to be given to the debaters to actively prove to them and equally the audience whether they would actually prioritize police officers making decisions based off of consciousness. With that, I welcome the judges to ask a question to proposition and opposition.
My question is to the side government. What's the metric for determining consciousness?
To side opposition, my question then is, in instances of political affiliated causes and extrajudicial killings, how then do you ensure that the people are protected?
Idea is, how then do you measure consciousness for side proposition and for side opposition. The question is, how do you protect citizens in instances of political affiliations as well as brutality generally? With that, we welcome side proposition, who have 1 minute strictly to further their argument and maybe close it off, probably sway the judges as well. Proposition.
Very quickly, there are two corrective mechanisms for subjectivity in society, the judiciary and the constitution. Even if you don't have any conscience, follow the national conscience, which is the constitution. And as for the interpretation of what the constitution says, that is for the judiciary to say. Of course, we've had a government that has broken constitutional law after constitutional law, that has said that, for example, the housing bill is unconstitutional, sending police officers to Haiti is unconstitutional, and the like. So, of course, we think that in these protests, where the judiciary has specifically said, do not brutalize protesters, and they still do it, we think for our side, we are correct in saying that the police officers following the conscience and disobeying orders will be well within what is objective in society. But specifically to one of the things that they came and talked about, following orders. If the government tells you to protect property, and your interpretation of those orders are you go and brutalize people on the streets, pick me up, almost break my hands and throw me in jail just for talking to the media personally, or kill more than 300 people, right, many of whom were children, then that means either your interpretation of those orders were wrong, or you interpreted it the way the government wanted you to interpret it. Think about that, judges.
Yeah, simple response. We think for political affiliated problems, there is the solvency needs to equally be a political solvency. This is why if the opposition actively calls out the government, there is more urgency towards resolving that problem rather than ensuring it from the police. This looks like when the opposition and the government decided to work together, the protest subsided and there was calm in society. Responses to them. We already did our worst case scenario. Let's do the worst case scenario. You're telling the police to go fight Al-Shabaab. Their conscience is telling them they're most likely going to die. Who is going to fight Al-Shabaab for you if you actively know you're going to die? I won't go fight Al-Shabaab. There would be more harm accruing to these people, and we think that's bad for them. It directly assaults even the peace that exists between community, the state in itself lacking the international capacity, because everyone would look and say, if their own police are not willing to protect them, who's most likely going to protect them? We think their world is worse and ours is better. We rest.
The debaters have trusted their time and kept it to 1 minute short. I don't know if the judges have been swayed, but clearly they have reached a verdict. At home, right before we get to hear from what the judges have to say, feel free to message us on X at KTN with the hashtag Campus Debates. Let us know, who do you think deserves the 5th place, and who do you think has actively convinced you that they deserve 6th place? With that, we welcome the judges to give us the call and the verdict for this round. They get to determine who's 5th on tab and who's 6th on tab. Judges.
Okay, so this was a pretty interesting round. How I'm going to do this is I'm first going to give the call, then I'm going to give justification, or like why we think what we think, and then we can have a fight session later. But the call, so this debate was given to, drum rolls please. Oh, first shout out to my Uncle Frank. Anyways, so we had opposition above proposition, and here is why. So the biggest case we get from proposition is majorly like consciousness is based off of what society thinks is right. And in that regard, we think at the point in time, you owe a greater obligation to your society, or the society is the one that is better able to help you as a police person. It's better for you to follow what the society wants. And that is like largely what determines your conscience. How opposition chooses to respond to this is that they say, at the point in time, there is no clear metric of determining consciousness. It's quite difficult for the police to act. And in that regard, there's likelihood that there's going to be lawlessness. How is this going to happen? There already exists something that everybody, or like the majority of the society, already agrees as to what should be done. And that's the law. At the point in time, police are becoming brutal. It's not because the law says they should be brutal, but rather that's what their conscience tells them to be. Then the harm that proposition tries to solve so much is then exacerbated in their world, because now we don't know how or what should be good or bad in terms of consciousness. But the second thing they tell you is like, look, you have a principal obligation to follow your contract. Like, you signed a contract and you exist within that contract. Whatever order you are given, you need to actively follow it. At the worst case scenario where you feel like your conscience is very, very important to you and you want to protect it so bad, then you have an opt-out mechanism. You can stop working for the government and that sort of chat. But they tell you, even in extrajudicial killings, this happens in very, very minor cases and rare cases. Why? At that particular point, the government can only call like such orders when they feel that they're at a threat. So like there's a lot of anarchy that is going. That is the only extreme case at the point where extrajudicial killings will happen and that sort of stuff. They analyze and tell you, even at that particular point, it is very important for you to follow the laws, because the government's major importance at that point is to maintain stability and that sort of chat. At the point in time you allow police officers to just do or like refuse orders based off of their consciousness, you even invalidate the judiciary system and create a lot of lawlessness, and that's like by and large a very bad thing. But thirdly, they also engage with you on how already consciousness as like a representation of the full society or like majority of society already exists. It's now going to be far much worse when we want to give each and every individual policeman the ability or autonomy to now make decisions based off of what they think is good and bad. The question then to proposition becomes, how then are we going to ensure, or like how then are we going to make sure that every policeman has a like full conscience or like a good conscience and is going to make better decisions for the protection of everyone within the society.
You have heard from our lovely judges that for this round, we have side opposition carrying the day. That is the team from Pioneer International University. They have been able to garner for themselves position 5 out of this entire season. I think it's a big win for them, but equally it speaks to the teams that they represent. Will Manchester or Arsenal get to be 5th place when they finish the Premier League, or are they just a letdown of the teams they represent? But equally, it's a massive congratulations to side opposition for the win that they've been able to get for themselves. For side proposition, they've equally managed to fight their way through the entire season and to get themselves to the place where they're at. Them being able to beat 6 other teams that existed prior to them is a massive, massive win, which means then equal congratulations to side proposition from Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology for being able to get for themselves position 6. I think it's been a very lovely round where we've gotten to understand the idea as to how police officers need to function within society. We've analyzed how consciousness is very subjective, and you cannot use that as a metric for the laws that are currently existing and whether or not to follow orders. But I think equally there's a clarification that has been made, which is police brutality is not something that is actively sensitive to things that are ordered by the state or by the people that are actively chosen to govern us. So to all police officers out there, we pray that you'll get to actively stop police brutality and help us in this fight for protecting citizens and protecting people at large. It's been fun. It's been amazing. We hope to see you next week, same time, same place, and hopefully in the final episode. My name is Mercy Vugutsa, your host.